Hi everyone, this is Constellations here. So I wanted to do a follow-up on my Polar Star guide and do a weapon comparison for Polar Star against Thundering Pulse, Skyward Harp and Rust, which you'll see here. Before that, I just want to quickly go into Thundering Pulse itself in detail, talk about its rotations and a bit on its artifacts as well as R1 to R5. If you are not interested in this session, then feel free to skip ahead to the weapon comparison. So everything else here is the same in terms of calculation. Exactly the same as the Polar Star. The only difference is the CR and CD rows. And the key thing I want to talk about is actually, okay, before that, probably I can show you guys the rotation figures. Okay. But you know what, let's look at it on the weapon comparison, that would be a better view. So I just want to quickly talk about the setup for Thundering Pulse. You should use a range burst followed by elemental skill and then one normal attack. That way you get all 3 stats. And you can just use a normal attack combo rotations, which will be as such. 10 seconds you do 3x M5C, 12 seconds you do dash cancel with a N3C. 14 seconds you do 4x with M1C at the last, as the last move, last attack string. But 10 seconds is for Shime. If you want to do more than 10 seconds, you should not be using Shime, you should be using HOD. Okay, so if you have a 4-piece HOD, I'll say optimally, as if you have a C0 Childe, then you should go for a 12 seconds melee duration. If you have a C1 Childe, then go for 14 seconds. So the Shime does perform slightly better than HOD on Thundering Pulse as well. In fact, it does even better compared to Polar Star, but it's not that big of a difference. 3.3 R1, 2.8% better than HOD at R5. Okay, so all these are pretty much the same as what I've covered in the previous video, so I'm not going to talk about them. Like I said, we are going to go fast here. One thing I want to call out is that Thundering Pulse does skill better than Polar Star. You get about 20% when you go from R1 to R5 as opposed to the 17 or 80% on Polar Star. I know it looks only like 2% difference, but that 2% makes it go from bad to average. Or I mean between Polar Star and Thundering Pulse. Or you can even say Thundering Pulse is good, Polar Star is average. Because Thundering Pulse on Yoimiya is actually 22%. So it also differs on the character and their kit. Engulfing is 24% on Raiden. So that's a very nice boost. Okay. So I mean Thundering Pulse is off banner, this is just good to know. Okay. So with that, I have briefly covered Thundering Pulse and its rotation combo. Bear in mind that Rust is going to use the same thing. Rust is going to be M5C as well, while Skyward Harp will be N3C without an N1C. Because Polar Star, you need to do an N1C first to get your stack, whereas for Skyward Harp, you do not need to do that. But not to worry, I have factored all of that in my damage calculations. I just want to share with you guys so that at least you know how it works. Because if you use a different attack string, the result is going to be different. Okay, so Polar Star, you always start with N1C followed by N3C. Thundering Pulse is always N5C, Skyward Harp is always N3C, Rust is always N5C. So Rust and Thundering Pulse is the same because both of them are normal attack focused. So that's why I use N5C. It's still better to use the charge attack even with Rust minus 10% charge attack damage because that charge attack modifier is much better than the 6 hit in Childe's combo. Okay, now these are the damage figures. It's a good thing that everything is shown in one view like this so that you guys can see it. If you want to look at it in detail, you can pause it. How to read this table is basically the same as the Kokomi weapon comparison that I did previously. So this means that this is Polar versus Thundering Pulse, this is Polar versus Skyward Harp, Thundering versus Skyward Harp, Polar versus Rust, Thundering versus Rust, and Skyward versus Rust. Okay. So you see the percentages figures here. It might look like a lot to take in at one go, but I will briefly cover it in my video, or rather I'll quickly cover it in my video, so you guys know what to do with it. But I will only cover Polar Star versus each of these weapons, rather than say Skyward versus Thundering. I will make some brief mentions, but I won't compare every single figure. Okay, so the figures are here. Pause the video if you need to. But I'll suggest to pause it only after going through my video in totality so that you hear all the points that I've covered. So Polar Star is actually only 3.7 to 4.1% better than Thundering Pulse at R1. So what this means is here 3.7%, 3.8%, 4.1%, 4.1%, 3.7, 3.8. So this is the range that we are talking about here. And it varies due to your artifact, whether it's Shimenawa or 4-piece HOD, how long is your stance duration, whether it's 12 seconds or 10 seconds, and the talent level as well. Okay, whether it's level 9 skill and burst or level 12 skill and burst. Childe is a character that has been out for almost a year, so that's the reason why I'm not including his level 6 skill for comparison. I think by now, if you have a Childe, your Childe should already be at level 9 skill. If not, then please work towards that. Okay. And the difference between Polar Star and Thundering Pulse, it will diminish further at R5 versus R5, which means R5 Polar Star versus R5 Thundering Pulse, the difference is only 1.6 to 2.3%. This is because Thundering Pulse scales better at R5 compared to Polar. If you remember when I first talked about the Thundering Pulse session, I mentioned that Thundering Pulse, when you go from R1 to R5, you get about 20% boost, but Polar Star you only get a 17 to 18% boost. 17 is when you are using 4-piece Shimenawa, 18% is when you are using HOD. Okay. In fact, when you use Shimenawa, the difference is even smaller, it's 1.6%. That's where the 1.6% is. 2.3% is when you use HOD. So the TLDR for Polar Star versus Thundering Pulse, if you already have Thundering Pulse, there's no point pulling for Polar Star. Not to mention the other weapons on the banner are not that great. So I will do one last look at the other weapons on the banner. It's a quick run through because the banner information has been released. I just haven't had the time to do a video on it because I was trying to complete this math video first. So you can still go for Polar Star if you want to pursue the highest damage possible regardless of cost, but I personally don't recommend it if you have Thundering Pulse. That percentage gain is just not worth it, especially if you have R5 Thundering Pulse. Why would you want to spend another $1,000 or $2,000 getting an additional 1.6 to 2.3% boost? And not worth it. Even as a viewer, I'm skipping this. Okay, so Polar Star, how about Polar Star versus Skyward Harp? For example, you may have skipped Thundering Pulse the last time it was available. Maybe you have felt that Skyward Harp was good enough, although it's very clear that Thundering Pulse is still better than Skyward Harp by quite a significant amount. I've already done some tests previously, actual in-game testing. You can see my conclusions on that. I'll put the video in the link on the top right corner here. But what you need to know basically is that Polar Star offers a 15 to 17.5% boost over Skyward Harp, which, to put things into perspective, is actually more than when you go from Rust to Skyward. When you go from Rust to Skyward, it ranges from 10% to 17%. And 70% is only one specific condition, depending on, like I said, again, depending on your artifact, melee stance duration, talent levels, etc. But effectively, you get what I mean. If Rust, let's put it in a tier example, right? If Rust is tier 2, okay, Skyward is going to be tier 1 because of the boost. Polar / Thundering Pulse is going to be tier 0, 0 being the best, of course, because Polar / Thundering Pulse offers so much more than it offers an even bigger boost than when you go from Rust to Skyward. When you go from Skyward to Polar, you actually get a bigger boost compared to Rust to Skyward. And you notice here that I put Polar and Thundering Pulse in the same tier, is because the difference between them is really not great. So these two weapons are basically in the same tier, Polar and Thundering Pulse. You can see from this fact, right? It's 3.7 to 4% or 1.6 to 2.3, whether it's R1 or R5. And for Polar Star versus Skyward Harp, the difference widens even further at R5 versus R5. It ranges from 21% to 27% because Polar scales better at R5 compared to Skyward. Skyward doesn't scale as well, especially its effect is really bad. It's just increasing the percentage chance to proc as well as the cooldown time. Okay, but one thing to bear in mind is that Childe is not a physical character. On a physical character, Skyward Harp will scale slightly better, but not by much, because it doesn't increase the actual damage of the proc when you go from R1 to R5. Okay, so if Skyward is the TLDR for Polar Star versus Skyward Harp, if Skyward is your current bow for Childe, pulling for Polar Star is definitely like a tier upgrade, so it's pretty nice. If the other weapons on the banner are okay or what you want, and you can afford to spend your Primo Gems, then yes, it's worth pulling. And what I mean by you can afford to spend your Primo Gems, it means that you're not intending to save for, say, you're not going to pull for Childe, or more Constellation of Childe, you're not intending to save for, say, Hu Tao or Gan Yu for some reason, then yes, it's worth pulling. Okay, so Polar Star versus Rust. Polar Star offers a 28 to 21.6% boost over Skyward Harp, which is a huge boost. It's bigger than oh, what did I say over Skyward Harp? Sorry, it should be Rust here. Sorry, which is a huge boost. It's bigger than most 4-star to 5-star weapon boost. Most 4-star to 5-star weapon boost will be like what I mentioned here, where it ranges from 10% to 15 or even almost 17%. That's a typical type of boost when you go from a 4-star to a 5-star weapon. But Polar Star is offering a 28 to 31.6%. It's almost double. And the difference widens even at R5. When you go from, say, Polar Star R5 to Rust R5, or rather Rust R5 to Polar Star R5, you get 40 to 46% boost because Polar skills much better at R5 compared to Rust. It's a recurring theme of the new 5-star weapons, right? They're getting a lot more boost on the weapon effect. And that's the reason why Rust falls off, because Rust weapon effect is very, very no frills. Let's just increase your normal attack damage in return for some reduction on charge attack damage. Not like Polar Star and Thundering Pulse where there's stack mechanics involved, etc. So the TLDR is, if Rust is your current bow for Childe, pulling for Polar Star is like 2 tiers worth of an upgrade, so it's really good. And if your Rust is not R5 at the moment, then I definitely encourage pulling on the banner, because the banner has Rust as well, so even if you don't get the jackpot, you can still get Rust refinements, right? You can get Rust refinements to upgrade your Rust if you don't hit the jackpot of the Polar Star. Okay, so let me just quickly switch to the banner. Yeah, so this is the banner information. You have Rust here. So that's the reason why I say if you are using Rust on your Childe and your Rust is not R5, you have an even better reason to pull on this banner. Because if you don't hit the jackpot and get this, at least you can get more Rust refinements, if you're not too unlucky. For Vonir Sword, for Vonir Lance, not that great, a bit niche. They do have some users in specific event challenges, but nothing further than that. Akuomaru, which is the new Claymore, it looks really good. I like its design and it fits very well with I'll say Beidou, and its effect does help Beidou as well. Basically, it gives you burst damage increase based on the max energy of your entire team member. With 3 80 energy characters plus 1 Raiden, you'll get about 79.2% energy boost, or half of that at R1. Okay, 79.2% is R5, half of that at R1. So it's basically a weapon that's slightly better than the Luxurious Zealot. But it's not worth it to pull for this if these two weapons are not what you want. In fact, I'm already skipping ahead to what I want to talk about in the final notes. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. It's not worth to go specifically for if the 5-star weapons are not what you want. But if the 5-star weapons are what you want, then yes, please go ahead. I really do like the design of this weapon. And personally, I am skipping this Polar Star banner. I'm not going to pull on the banner because I have TP. I already have Thundering Pulse for Childe. In fact, I have R5 and R1 that I'm switching between my Yoimiya and Childe. As and when it requires. And the other weapons really do not interest me. In fact, of the series of the Akuomaru, that new 4-star Claymore, there's going to be 2 new ones on the next banner in the same version. The Wave Breaker's Fin as well as the Moon's Moon. So those 2 weapons to me are a lot more interesting than the Claymore in terms of their effect, because it's better for, in a sense, it's better for Claymore and bow characters to get a bow or Claymore with high boost damage on burst, high damage boost on burst. So I'll talk about that in future when we have those weapons upcoming. And yeah, so the biggest takeaway here is if you have Thundering Pulse, don't pull for Polar Star, it's not worth it. If you have Skyward Harp, you can. If you you're not saving up your Primogens per se, and if you have Rust, your Rust is not R5, I 100% recommend you to pull for this weapon banner, because even if you don't get the jackpot of Polar Star, you can still get your Rust refinements. Alright, so yeah, I'm glad that this video is short, much shorter than the previous videos. Finally managed to cut it short by going through Rust and Thundering Pulse specific sections actually. Sorry, Rust and Skyward Harp specific sections. But at least I will talk about the attack strings or the attack combos to use for each of these weapons, so as to reach the damage figures that we are showing here. Okay, so thanks everyone for watching. If you like the content, remember the video and click subscribe for more. Bye.